Welcome, and thank you for joining me today for a session focused on utilizing screener data to structure your literacy block. This content was originally presented at the Teacher Leader Summit 2024. Whether you are here to review the content from this session, or you are experiencing this session for the first time, we hope that this will help you with structuring your literacy block and making important decisions within your block. This session is intended for classroom teachers in grades K through 3, as well as literacy coaches, interventionists, and other staff that may be supporting students in grades K through 3, as well as school leaders. Before we begin our new learning, I would like to anchor us in Louisiana's education priorities. By attending this session, we hope that you will be able to align your literacy instruction more closely with the science of reading, thus increasing your effectiveness as a classroom teacher. The objectives for this session include participants will analyze literacy screener data, explore connections from literacy screener indicators to core instruction, make instructional decisions inside of the core ELA block based on literacy screener data, explore implications for intervention, and make instructional decisions for interventions based on the literacy screener data. For our agenda, first, we will explore the purpose of the K-3 literacy screener. We will spend some time analyzing literacy screener data. We will use that data to make adjustments to core instruction through authentic examples of Tier 1 curriculum. We will use that data to also adjust small group instruction, and then we will conclude with our next steps. As we progress through this learning throughout this session, we would like to ground ourselves in the essential question: how will you utilize your literacy screener data to make instructional decisions in your core instruction and small group instruction? Or if you are in a support role, how will you support other teachers with utilizing their screener data to make instructional decisions within their classroom and small group instruction? Let's begin by reviewing the purpose of the K-3 literacy screener. Act 520 requires that all students in grades K through 3 be screened by a single statewide screener within the first 30 days of school, in December and in April. This screener is used to identify which students may be at risk for experiencing reading difficulties so that teachers can provide timely and effective support. The literacy screener also assists in identifying students for further evaluation for specific programming, including students who display characteristics of being dyslexic or gifted. In addition to the legislation, we also know that literacy screeners are supported by the research. I would like to refer you to the IES What Works Clearinghouse Guide titled Assisting Students Struggling with Reading, Response to Intervention, and Multi-Tier Intervention in the Primary Grades. You will notice there is also a QR code available to take you directly to this guide for future and further research. This guide essentially is a meta-analysis of the data that is available on how to best support struggling readers. The number one recommendation based on this research is that we should screen all students for potential reading problems at the beginning of the year and again in the middle of the year. There is moderate evidence, meaning there is still room for more research, but the tier is promising. This means that the research that is available shows lots of promising connections between screening students and student outcomes. Again, please feel free to further explore this guide. We just want you to know that the research shows the importance of screening students, primarily so that we can intervene quickly and intervene early to prevent this gap from widening. Additionally, we would like to make sure that the language is clear that we are using throughout this session. DIBELS 8 from Amplify is the universal screener mandated for all public school systems in Louisiana. The publisher is Amplify. The digital platform created by Amplify is known as M-Class, and the actual assessment instrument used is the Dibbles 8th edition. Universal screening is mandatory at K-3 schools and is part of teacher accountability. However, it is not always clear how the core curriculum addresses the skills that are assessed by the screener. Therefore, classroom teachers may need support using literacy screener data to make important instructional decisions inside of their core instruction. As you begin the process of analyzing literacy screener data, take some time to consider these questions. What information should teachers gain from analyzing literacy screener data? And what are potential next steps that screener data could inform? Now let's connect what we know about the science of reading to the literacy screener. If you notice on Scarborough's reading rope, there are two main sections or components of the rope: language comprehension and word recognition. Take a moment to reflect on your learning from your Foundations of Literacy coursework. Which literacy skills from Scarborough's reading rope are addressed through the K-3 literacy screener? The literacy screener addresses word recognition with the individual strands of phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. We know from our learning about the science of reading that literacy is extremely complex. Each one of these strands becomes interwoven to create skilled reading with increasingly strategic strategies and increasingly automatic reading by the skilled reader. If you need additional support or more review of the science of reading, please feel free to use the provided QR code to access more information. Now, let's take a moment to explore some real data from a first grade classroom. What do you notice about the composite scores for this first grade class? Please feel free to pause the video and take a moment to analyze the data. What do you notice about the different measures? Again, please feel free to pause the video. What are some implications for instruction and intervention? Pause the video as needed. You may have noticed that this particular group of first grade students appears to be struggling significantly with phonemic awareness, letter sounds, and decoding. While there are some other areas of concern, we want to focus on these pieces first. There are also some strengths. It is obvious that some of our students are actually proficient and doing well with word reading. However, it seems that there are some other issues at play. Let's connect this data to the science of reading. The students in this first grade classroom need support with emergent literacy skills. They are functioning and still learning with their letter-sound correspondences. Success of core instruction will be dependent upon students mastering these emergent skills first before being able to progress to more complex phonics skills. Now let's take a look at some examples from a high-quality instructional material core curriculum to connect these lesson objectives with literacy screener measures. The examples that we will use come from the CKLA curriculum, the skills strand. Let's take a moment to look at an example of high-quality instructional materials for first grade that may be used to instruct our group of first graders. For the purposes of this learning, we will assume that the beginning of year Dibbles screener has been administered And we have begun implementing the CKLA curriculum within a first grade classroom. You will notice that Unit 1 begins with a review of skills taught in kindergarten that should have been mostly mastered by this point, followed by an assessment to determine the student's current mastery of the skills. We are now ready to teach Lesson 12. You will notice that Lesson 12 will focus on the sounds for the letter B, L, and R, as well as how to form and spell those letter sounds. As educators, we must strive to become critical consumers of our curriculum in order to best meet the needs of our students. Let's take a moment to read the objectives of the lesson plan and annotate the knowledge and skills that students will need in order to be successful with this lesson. What skills are addressed in the lesson? Please feel free to pause the video. How are the skills from this lesson directly connected to the literacy screener measures? Again, please feel free to pause the video to reflect. You may have noticed that some of the lesson objectives address the segmenting of words into phonemes, as well as isolating initial, medial, and final sounds within spoken single-syllable words. All three of these objectives support the development of phonemic awareness. This indicates that the standards and skills are directly connected to the PSF, or Phoneme Segmentation Fluency Indicator, which is a subtest of the DIBELS screener. Explicitly teaching the instructional activities that support these standards could promote growth in phoneme segmentation fluency, and thus yield improvement on the progress monitoring and benchmark assessments. You may have also noticed this objective: spell one-syllable words using the letter sound correspondences taught in grade 1. Let's think out loud about this standard or skill being addressed. What do you notice about this standard? With which DIBELS subtest could we connect this practice? You may have noticed that this objective addresses letter sound. This connects us to nonsense word fluency, correct letter sounds. Now take a moment to think about this objective or standard. What do you notice about the standard? With which DIBELS subtest could we connect this practice? Pause the video as needed. The skill being addressed within this standard or objective is connected to decoding. This could support oral reading fluency. Finally, how are these skills connected to the literacy screener measures? What do you notice about the standard? With which DIBELS subtest could we connect this practice? Pause the video as needed. We know that teaching letter formation in conjunction with letter sound correspondence can strengthen orthographic mapping. Based on the literacy screener data for our first grade students, where might we anticipate this group of first graders struggling within the curriculum or lesson? How could Lesson 12 strengthen the needed areas of improvement for these students based on the literacy screener data? You may be able to draw some clear connections between the student's deficit in the area of phonemic awareness, letter sounds, and decoding directly to the standards and objectives that will be taught within Lesson 12. Now let's take a look at making instructional decisions inside of core instruction. We will begin with a scenario from the same first grade Lesson 12. Now, our screener data showed that approximately 56% of my first grade students are not meeting benchmark for phoneme segmentation fluency. This tells me that I should teach this instructional activity with more fidelity because it supports the blending and segmenting of phonemes. I should be sure to provide more clear and explicit examples of blending and segmenting phonemes or sounds. Let's consider how is this instructional activity directly connected to the literacy screener measures. This activity supports phonemic awareness, blending, and segmenting. So therefore, it would be connected to phoneme segmentation fluency, an indicator of the Dibbles assessment, or PSF. But what if a higher percentage, for example, 75% of my students are performing at benchmark or above benchmark on the PSF subtest? Would I necessarily need to do all 8 of the examples provided within the lesson for blending and segmenting? Could I do fewer examples to allow more instructional time focused on a skill that has been identified as a greater need? These are some very simple questions that we can ask ourselves about the curriculum and the lesson and the instructional activity when looking through the lens of our literacy screener data. So continue to consider, how might a teacher adjust instruction for this lesson based on the literacy screener data? Let's take a look of an example of this lesson in action. You may notice some things within this lesson that the teacher does really well. You may also notice some areas of improvement for this teacher that she could focus on in order to better meet the needs of her students who are specifically struggling with phoneme segmentation fluency. Please take a moment to view this video clip and take some notes regarding what the teacher does well as what the teacher may need to improve upon.
Get your hands ready. Say the sounds with me. Sh. Three fingers for shift. Sh. And b. And back. 3 fingers for back. B. Back. 3 fingers for short.
You may have noticed that when delivering this instructional activity to students, the teacher used explicit language and a very clear model of how she could use hands and fingers to help students with blending and segmenting phonemes. So her model aligns very closely with the instructional activity. She is delivering this lesson and instructional activity with a high degree of fidelity and intentionality. However, you may have noticed that the teacher could focus on clearing up some confusions with certain consonant and vowel sounds. Being very intentional with the sounds that you produce as a model for students can contribute to their success or struggles as they too are learning how to blend and segment phonemes while also strengthening letter sound correspondence. This teacher may want to focus on clipping some of those extra schwa sounds or at the end of certain consonants. And in the South especially, we probably need to pay a little more attention to our vowel sounds, especially the vowel sound for short E and the vowel sound for short I. These are some things that we need to take into consideration when looking through the lens of our literacy screener data for this particular instructional activity, because we know our group of first graders have been struggling with phoneme segmentation fluency as well as letter sound correspondence. We have to be much more intentional and strategic with how we deliver this particular instructional activity. Using our professional judgment based on literacy screener data, we can strategically identify components of our curriculum that will best meet the needs of our students.
Get your hands ready. Say the sounds with me.
Now, let's take a look at another lesson from this, or another instructional activity from this lesson. This is the flip book review. Take a moment to pause the video and read the steps of this instructional activity. What skills are addressed within this instructional activity? You may notice that this instructional activity involves showing students a letter, correctly producing the sound for this letter, and also providing a word to connect the letter to the sound. For example, B, bat. Additionally, you may notice that this curriculum uses something called a power bar. The power bar gives students a visual to remind them how common each spelling is. For example, the letter B says B with a high degree of consistency, so it has a longer power bar. Now, according to our screener data, 61% of my students are not meeting benchmark for nonsense word fluency, correct letter sound. This tells me that I should teach this instructional activity with more intentionality and higher levels of fidelity because it directly supports letter sound correspondence. This means that I should be sure to provide more clear and explicit examples to solidify letter sound correspondence. This activity consists primarily of modeling the letter sound correspondence for specific letters. How is this instructional activity directly connected to the literacy screener measures? Again, it connects to nonsense word fluency, correct letter sounds. Especially when the teacher points to the letter, names the letter, reads the corresponding word, and reminds them of the correct letter sound that's used to spell and write that letter in English. How might the teacher adjust this activity based on the literacy screener data? I noticed that this activity consists primarily of modeling the letter sound correspondence, and strong modeling is crucial whenever we are introducing a new skill or concept. However, are there ways in which I could increase the number of exposures to this letter sound? How could we increase engagement among students during the flipbook review? For example, you may incorporate students who you know have mastered this letter sound already to help lead parts of this activity. Or you may simply have your students echo the letter, the word, and the sound so that you have an opportunity to listen to them producing the sounds. Now let's watch this instructional activity in action. As we did before, Let's focus on identifying some things that the teacher does really well when implementing this activity. Also, take note of any concerns or areas in which this teacher could strengthen or adjust her instruction to better meet the needs of our class of first grade students.
The first one we have here is this sound. Do you know what this sound is? This one can be tricky because it looks like another one of our sounds. If you said B, you'd be correct. B can be spelled with this letter, B, as in bat. This power bar is almost all the way across. What does that mean? You got it. That means it's very common to see B spelled with one B. But there's another spelling too.
Reflect on this example of the instructional activity. What did the teacher do well? You may have noticed that her language was very intentional, and she provided a good model for her students, and she was closely aligned to the instructions provided within the instructional activity. However, you may have noticed that she needs to clip those schwa sounds at the end of her consonant. We know again that this is important for our students who may be struggling with phoneme segmentation as well as letter sound correspondence. Now, this is obviously a video that was created for virtual learning. However, if you were facing your students and delivering this lesson, we could look for those opportunities to further engage our students, whether they are echoing the sounds or incorporating some sort of movement or manipulatives. Counters with Elkonin boxes for certain activities could be appropriate. For this activity, we would definitely want to make sure that our students are correctly producing the letter name and the letter sound. This provides a wonderful opportunity for observation and anecdotal note-taking to help drive our instruction, which could be connected to small group support later. Let's take a look at the next piece or instructional activity within this lesson. Pause the video and take a moment to read and skim this instructional activity. Reviewing the spellings, writing the spellings. You will notice that this activity is going to strengthen the connection between the letter formation, the name of the letter, and the sound of the letter. These are the skills that are addressed within the instructional activity, and they directly connect to letter sound correspondence. Now, how is this instructional activity directly connected to the literacy screener measures? Because the activity is supporting letter sound correspondence through modeling of writing the letter, tracing the letter, tracing and copying the letter, and encouraging students to say the sound each time they write the letter, these steps in the instructional activity will support correct letter sounds within the nonsense word fluency subtest of the DIBELS screener. Even though students do not actually write or encode sounds on the nonsense word fluency correct letter sound subtest, these steps, this instructional activity, will strengthen the orthographic mapping of these letters and the letter sound correspondence. How might a teacher adjust the activity based on the literacy screener data? Well, this group of first graders, 61% of these students are not meeting benchmark for nonsense word fluency correct letter sounds. So for this group, I know that I should teach this activity with more fidelity and intentionality. I need to provide more clear and explicit examples to solidify the letter-sound correspondence. The activity consists primarily of modeling the letter-sound correspondence. So, could I adjust the instruction to increase student engagement? Could I support more exposures to the letter sound and the orthographic features? Why is it important for students to say the sound each time the students write the letter? Could we bring this activity into our small group instruction? Considering questions such as these can help with making those instructional decisions. If I notice that my students are struggling during this piece of the lesson, I would want to be very sensitive and responsive to those observed behaviors. I would want to take those anecdotal notes and be sure to pay close attention to students who struggle the most. This would be an opportunity to pull the instruction into small group for practice and reinforcement. Let's watch this lesson or instructional activity in action. As before, let's look for things the teacher does well when implementing the activity, as well as areas in which she could improve or strengthen her instruction to better meet the needs of our first grade class of students.
At this page and practice writing these 4 letters. The first one we have here is a lowercase b, or the sound b. You need to draw a long line down and a circle to the right. That was a little messy, so I'm going to try again. Long line down, circle to the right. Much better. For the capital, you need to draw a long line down, then lift your pen and start back at the top with 1 hump and 2. Next, we have a lowercase l, or the sound o. You just need to draw 1 long line down from top to bottom. That's pretty easy. For the capital, draw 1 long line down and then a short line to the right. Still pretty easy. We've got one more to look at. The letter R, or the sound For the lowercase, you need to start between the dotted line and the bottom and draw a short line down. Then come up and draw half a hump. For the capital, draw from top to bottom a long line down, then lift up your pen and start back at the top. Draw a half circle to the right and then a diagonal line down. On these next pages, all of the words.
Let's reflect on how the teacher delivered this instructional activity within Lesson 12 from CKLA. You may have noticed that she did provide a model for each of the 3 letters that she was teaching: the letter B, the letter L, and the letter R. She also did use clear language. However, you might have noticed that she may need to tighten up the language used to describe the letter formation for each of the letters. It is extremely important for both horizontal articulation across your grade level, as well as vertical articulation across the grade levels, to increase the consistency of the language that is used when describing how to form letters. This is extremely important when facilitating and supporting orthographic mapping. This clear language strengthens the connection between the letter and the sound. You may have also noticed that she only provided 1 or 2 models for each letter. This is probably because it was designed as a virtual lesson in which students could rewind and rewatch certain parts. However, if we are sitting in front of students, we need to be able to provide at least 2 to 3 strong modeled examples. We may even share the pen with students to have some immediate feedback and observation of the application for writing these letters. Perhaps they have their workbooks in front of them as you are doing the model, and then you can immediately check for their practice as you repeat those same steps. Observing your students and being responsive to their behaviors in the moment will help drive how many times you need to continue modeling or providing guided practice, as well as whether or not you need to bring this activity into small group for further practice and remediation. Adjustments can be made to this lesson based on your direct observations of your students. Now let's take some time to internalize and practice this new learning. Analyze the remaining instructional activities within Lesson 12, which has been provided in your handouts. Read the remaining instructional activities and ask yourself some of the focusing questions, as well as annotate specific areas or components of the lesson that directly connect to the literacy screener measures. Also, be sure to take note of opportunities to make instructional adjustments to better support the group of first graders for whose data we have been analyzing. Annotate the skills and make those direct connections to the literacy screener measures. Consider your instructional implications based on the literacy screener data. You may want to continue practicing this as well within future lessons, or try this with your own curriculum. Keep in mind that these lessons came from CKLA. We understand that many schools have chosen to use other curricular programs to support foundational skills for literacy. These practices and skills that we are working with today to analyze screener data and to adjust our instruction are meant to be transferable. You can use this practice with any of your foundational skills curriculums. So again, as you continue analyzing Lesson 12 or additional lessons, ask yourself some of these focusing questions. How can teachers use literacy screener data to make instructional decisions inside of core instruction? What literacy skills are addressed in the lesson objectives? What skills from this lesson are directly connected to the literacy screener measures? What literacy skills are addressed within each instructional activity? How is each instructional activity directly connected to the literacy screener measures? How might a teacher adjust each instructional activity based on the literacy screener measures? Take a moment to pause this video and spend some time analyzing your curriculum lessons and annotating through these focusing questions. Now that we have had some practice with analyzing literacy screener data and using the data to make decisions inside of core instruction, let's look at how we can do the same to support small group instruction or intervention. Let's consider this question. How can classroom teachers utilize classroom literacy screener data to make instructional decisions inside of small group instruction or intervention? Again, I would like to bring you to the IES What Works Clearinghouse Guide titled Assisting Students Struggling with Reading, Response to Intervention, and Multi-Tier Intervention in the Primary Grades. The research compiled within this guide support two additional indicators or recommendations that we would like to look at within this session. Number two is to provide time for differentiated reading instruction for all students based on assessments of students' current reading level. And number three, provide intensive, systematic instruction on up to 3 foundational reading skills in small groups to students who score below the benchmark score on universal screening. Both of these have a very high rationale for the research. Number two shows minimal evidence, meaning that more research could be conducted, but the research that is available has very high rationale. There is already a lot of research evidence available for recommendation number three, and the tier is promising. Let's review briefly some things that you have already learned about small group instruction from a session provided on the Louisiana Literacy Library. Small group instruction, the how and why. You should recall that small group instruction is a time for teachers to provide targeted support to students who did not master the content or skills introduced during whole group instruction. Small group instruction is responsive, timely, and inclusive. For small group instruction to be effective, a systematic approach to collecting formative data on student learning is essential. More information about small group instruction can be accessed within the Louisiana Literacy Library. Please feel free to use this QR code provided to access this additional learning. Now let's take a look at the M-Class platform. The M-Class platform automatically groups students according to areas of need and provides suggested instructional activities for each group. As teachers conduct progress monitoring, they need to be sure to click on Update Recommendations for students to be regrouped as needed. Remember that small groupings, intervention groupings should be intentional and flexible. Let's take a look at this small group of students recommended based on the assessment data for our first graders. This group of students has a larger gap in their literacy acquisition and will need strategic intervention and support to support their learning and to close the gap. What do you notice about this particular group of first grade students? What are the identified areas of strength? With which skills will this group need more intensive support and instruction? You may have noticed that this group is comprised of 4 students. All 4 of these students need support with phonemic awareness. They can segment some word parts. However, these 4 students need to work on identifying first, middle, and last sounds within words that contain 3 or more phonemes. They also need to continue practice with building fluency in phoneme segmentation. Let's connect what we know about this group of students to the science of reading. Where would the students fall along the phonemic awareness continuum? These students need to work on identifying sounds within words. So we are at the very early stages of phoneme awareness. Before students can become successful with more sophisticated forms of phoneme manipulation, we need to really work on solidifying the ability to identify and isolate phonemes. This will then support the ability to blend and segment, which will support the ability to add and delete phonemes and eventually for substitution. Now, you may recall that you can also view individual student recommendations for additional instructional support. Let's think about what the benefit would be of doing this in addition to viewing the recommended lessons for groups of students. By analyzing individual student recommendations, you should be able to take a closer look at the observed response patterns and see exactly in which ways a student is showing strength in some areas, whereas they may be showing a need for support in others. Be sure to dig into these individual reports for your students. Now, back to our group of 4 students who need support with phonemic awareness. These are some of the observed patterns for this small group of students based on their responses from the benchmark screeners. This list of patterns still leave us with far too many lessons from which to choose. So we need to very strategically select which skill or focus that we would like to use within our small group instruction or intervention. For example, if we want to continue our instructional focus for these students on segmenting words with 2 or 3 phonemes, we would need to click and select this skill from our list in order to narrow down the focus. This focus will also connect directly to the kind of progress monitoring that we use for these students. Once I have selected my instructional focus based on the observed patterns for this group of students, I am then provided with a suite or bank of lessons that will directly support the development of phonemic awareness. You'll notice that each of these focus on students practicing orally blending words with initial consonant blends, practicing orally blending words with initial consonant blends again in the second activity, and the third activity, orally blending 4 or more phonemes to produce single syllable words with beginning and ending blends. So as I select the appropriate instructional activity, I need to again connect this to the assessment data as well as the individual student response patterns. I would probably want to begin with a lesson that is a little more attainable for students with some strong models, guided practice and support before moving on to a more complex lesson, such as the third lesson, which involves 4 or more phonemes. My students are probably not quite ready for that many phonemes. We will have future support and professional development on how to strategically select instructional activities such as these to best meet the needs of our students. So what are your next steps? Classroom teachers, please attend sessions on connections between screener and core. Look back at your science of reading training to make stronger connections to those best practices. And let your screener data this year help drive your instructional decisions. School leaders, help your teachers with digging into current reports to discuss professional learning opportunities over the summer and throughout the school year. You can provide for your teachers professional learning that uplifts reading reports, adjusting core instruction, and intervention and progress monitoring. In closing, literacy screener data should drive the decision-making for core instruction and intervention. The closer we are to the pulse of our students and the more responsive we are to the pulse through professional learning and coaching, the more we can ensure student success. Classroom teachers, what is one thing you will implement from today's session to utilize your literacy screener data to make instructional decisions in your core instruction and small group instruction or intervention? Coaches and leaders, what is one thing you will implement from today's session to support classroom teachers with making instructional decisions in core instruction and small group instruction or intervention? Please spend some time reflecting on your learning today. If you are watching this session in June or early July, please be aware of our summer literacy tour. You can contact Louisiana Literacy at la.gov with questions regarding these dates. Just know that this is free learning, free opportunity for professional development across the state, and we would love to see you there. For additional information, please contact Louisiana Literacy at la.gov. And I am Wendy Brooks, the K-5 Literacy Specialist for the Louisiana Department of Education. Please reach out if you need additional support, and we will be glad to provide that, and also be on the lookout for future learning sessions around DIBELS and using DIBELS screener data within your classroom instruction and small group